Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us here in the second segment. We are speaking with Nick Griffin from the Alliance for Peace and Freedom, and also Jack Sen from British Renaissance. Very interesting discussion here in terms of both what's happening in England, but also in Europe at large, and what we need to do, basically, to turn things around. And let's actually pick up on something that Jack mentioned at the end of the first segment there, because I know you had some points on that, Nick, in terms of basically not really agreeing with Jack what he said. So please pick up for us and explain your disagreement there.
Yes, obviously I feared this would be one of those discussions where we'd all agree on everything, but fortunately now we don't. So I've got to disagree with Jack on the idea that perhaps the politicians will listen and they'll change things. Having been very, very closely involved in by far the most successful episode of in terms of using the electoral process for a genuine nationalist party in Britain, in British history. I've watched how after the initial shock they ground us down, and I've got to say that they've got the measure of people like us, and because they learn internationally, they've got the measure of people like us all across Europe. So the NPD in Germany used to worry them, so now they've got the Alternative für Deutschland, and the NPD can make no headway. So they've replaced the threat of a rising genuine nationalist party with something which is some kind of hybrid and certainly doesn't have a revolutionary mentality and doesn't really understand the nature of the problem. So they've got the measure of us. When in the early 2000s, when the BNP was rising, the more we rose, the more they attacked us. And the more they attacked us, the more people who were sick of politicians and felt they were all the same were attracted to us. So it simply didn't stop us. An enormous amount of research was done, mainly funded by the Joseph Rowntree Trust, which is one of the wealthiest to the far left or grant-making organisations in Britain. They did a lot of research into how to stop us. They found that smearing us wouldn't basically work. And it's at that stage that the BBC started to talk UKIP up. And they simply created a fake party. So with a combination of fake parties and false promises from existing politicians, they will always be able to persuade the gullible voters. How even the harder you work as a nationalist party to wake people up, once they're awake, they then still look, well, but who's most likely to get in and make a difference? And I had so many people come out to me in the last European elections saying, I voted for you last time. It's fantastic. You've done a great job, etc. I'd love to see you back in, but I'm going to have to vote UKIP because they're more important to win. And let's face it, they basically say the same as you anyway, but they're less unpopular. And they could always pull up an hat. And if the one party collapses, they can simply create another. Or if now they know what to do. Or if one party becomes too soft, then they create another, which is a little bit more hard line between the real nationalists and the soft kosher nationalists. And they can always do that. And when you add in the demographic problems, the fact that our people have given up on voting, and the worse it gets, the more they will. The fact that the minute ISIS and Al-Qaeda really kick off, and we've seen absolutely nothing yet, there'll be people heading for the doors by the hundreds of thousands. Nationalism in Britain, we always had a problem. London was obviously our capital city. And our vote was always basically static, even as London was getting worse and worse, because every year for 30 years, 100,000 white Londoners left as white vote. So just as someone was reaching the point when they'd vote for the Nationalist Party, they had the house on the market, or they were looking to sell and get out and go somewhere else. And the same will be true all over.
Exactly. By the time they get to that mental place where they're ready to say, like, this has to stop, then it's like too late in the area where they are or something. When they've experienced it enough, then it's too late. It's the same thing with these, certain of these areas in Sweden. Same thing is happening there. So let me ask you this, though, Nick. Did the mainstream media, because I'm trying to figure out the tactic, the way they managed to do this, because obviously the rise of UKIP then was aided by the mainstream media. Did they just shift from basically criticizing the BNP to UKIP so that you guys didn't get the same airplay, or what? How did that happen?
I actually, you can almost date it really very precisely to the final stage of this, my appearance on Question Time. The BBC were convinced that by they set out to establish the left-wing mantra that the BNP, and particularly myself, was fascist, racist, Islamophobic, and homophobic. And even when they let me speak, they only let me speak in order to establish, well, what do you really think about Islam and what do you really think about homosexuals? They only let me speak in order to establish those points. And to their horror, it was a complete stitch up. And we decided that I should go on and get beaten up on TV. So therefore, I was defensive, and I'm not particularly good when I'm defensive. But to the BBC's horror, the week after the Question Time stitch up, the BNP's support went up in the opinion polls from it had never been above 4% ever, and it went up to 22%. So at that point, they realised that having Griffin on and letting him condemn himself wasn't going to work. And from that point, they never ever had me on any mainstream TV or radio channel, except when they absolutely had to under the law at election time. So that was the cut-off point. Under their own rules, they should have had me on Question Time at least 12 times, and instead only that one lynching. And on the contrary, Nigel Farage was on Question Time, has been on Question Time more than any other politician in its 32-year history. So they saw how to deal with nationalist dissent, and they dealt with it very effectively indeed. Having learnt that lesson, they're not going to change.
I think Nigel Farage has been on Question Time 13 times, which is a remarkable number if you think about it. I mean, he's only been a public figure for less than a decade. So he's been on...
Did you say 13 or 30?
13. Oh, it's 13, more than 13.
Yeah. It was 22 several years ago.
Oh, Jesus, was it? Sorry, but I made a mistake. I didn't realize that. That's quite a few times then, yeah. I don't know where I thought 13, but 22. I mean, that works out to 2 or 3 times a year, it appears.
Yes, yeah, and it's now more than that as well. So it's gone on at a large scale. When you put those problems, because I don't want to sort of finish that bit of the conversation just, well, what the hell do we do then? We're all doomed. Go away and boil our heads or whatever. No, when you put that problem together with the demographic complete disaster in Western Europe, and the fact that there's an equal demographic disaster in terms of decline in our own population happening in, for instance, Hungary, and the Hungarian government know it. It's not so bad because they haven't at the same time got waves of immigrants breeding like rabbits in their own cities as well and outnumbering them in their own country. But on present trends, the population of Hungary will drop from 10 million now to 2 million by the end of the century, other than the fact there'll be some 5 million gypsies. So the Hungarians would also be a minority. Now, the Hungarian government, which isn't perfect, but it's on a sort of self-radicalization path, they've realized this, so they're working to boost their population with at present rather crude measures. But here's the point, very, very simply, when you've lost a battle, and we've lost the battle for Western Europe, if you stay on the battlefield in broken segments with basically no weaponry, no morale, no cohesion, you're simply going to be exterminated. And where we are now in Western Europe, this is a shocking thing to have to say, and it'll shock a lot of people. And it includes, I would say, large parts of Sweden. And right from the top to the bottom of Western Europe, we've lost the struggle at present, certainly to dominate Western Europe politically, and therefore turn things round. We therefore have to regroup somewhere where we can win, which is Central and Eastern Europe. And our people, especially nationalists and young nationalists, they need to get themselves and their kids or their grandchildren to countries like Hungary and Poland, which don't want to commit suicide, and help give them the numbers and the mentality to fight, to help warn their people as genuine refugees about what's coming next, to make sure that the rich fat cat liberals aren't able to shift to those countries having ruined ours. They can stay and fucking well die in London and Stockholm, as far as I'm concerned. Pardon the language. Sure. So we now need to do that, and to ensure that Christendom and the white race survive as the dominant force somewhere, and it can be done in Central and Eastern Europe at the present. Another 25 years' time, if they don't turn around what's happening there, and then you've got a massive third world population in Western Europe, they can build all the walls they want. Unless they've got large numbers of young men with guns prepared to use them behind those walls will be pushed down by the third world.
Well, I was going to say, if things get really bad, you don't think there's any way to, honestly, repatriating people could work. There's no way you think that any government in the next 20, 30 years will decide that repatriation of undesirables could be an option?
you hit the word on the head there, the undesirables. Yes, repatriating the undesirables could probably be done. But in demographic terms, the undesirables aren't the problem. It's the ones who are perfectly desirable and perfectly okay. They're still a demographic disaster, which converts us into a minority in our own country.
When I said undesirables, I meant when I say undesirables, I mean pretty much voluntarily repatriating people, all non-English people, and then probably involuntarily repatriating the most undesirables population in the minority populations. Yeah. If the political climate in the country changes to such an extent and people realize they're losing their homeland, do you not think that our government will listen to the will of the people and possibly even forcibly repatriate people who do not belong in the country because they've never assimilated, they can't assimilate, and there's no way forward with them? I mean, they brought them in at some stage, so there's no reason to remove people at a certain stage as well.
Well, bear in mind, first of all, they brought them in not by accident. They brought them in to do what it's done to us. So just because it's now creating chaos and trouble, they won't want to reverse it. They were brought in to destroy us, and it's doing the job. The second point is that really it's the squeaky hinge, it's the people who push who get listened to. And if there was any hint of any kind of serious repatriation program, then you would have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of the various different ethnics mobilized, particularly around the Islamic banner, and the far left and the liberals, all turning out in vast numbers. And you'd have the people who run the United States of America having colored revolutions left, right, and center, destroying the economy in order to stop any nationalist revival in any part of Western Europe. It simply isn't realistic to believe that the public will wake up enough to be prepared to put their country through a state of civil war on the streets and having their economy crushed from outside by the international banking cartels and so on. People simply won't do it. So no, it's not realistic. It's not realistic even to say we can control our own streets, because when you were talking earlier about the arms that the Muslim community have and so on, in a way the arms aren't the problem. You can always get arms, you can always fight. It's the mental thing. And the fact is, if you go into any gym anywhere in certainly Britain, I know it's very similar in France and Belgium and so on, you won't find young white men, very many of them, in the gym. You'll find some Poles in Britain, that's about it. Most of the people in the gyms are young members of young ethnic minorities. The overwhelming majority of the Muslim or half castes or blacks who are about to become Muslim, and they're training there in order to fight jihad, while young Brits, if they're good on some PlayStation game, they think they're the bee's knees. And the fact is that we could not win a fight in this country at present. We don't have the people with the mentality to fight. Ireland's a different matter, for instance, but not Britain and not Belgium and not France.
I would have to agree with you because of the fact that the vast majority of nationalists that I encounter on the internet hide behind pseudonyms and pictures of Thor and Odin. There's not too many even nationalists who are willing to actually step up, show their face, and get onto the street. It's quite alarming. You won't find any young Islamic male covering his face. He probably covers his wife's face.
Well, but that's obviously, Jack, that's obviously because they do have more to lose in terms of they might have a family and employment, etc. If they show their face, they might lose their job. I mean, we do understand why many do that. It doesn't have to, that doesn't mean though that of course that there isn't people that might be in a position where they could show their face and they just don't want to, or there's something else is going on there. But one point though I feel I have to make here is that many of the people that have come to our countries, they have come voluntarily, right? I mean, at least this latest migration wave, they have walked into our countries themselves. They have fled from conditions that now are coming to our countries. We haven't even gotten into the fight yet. We have much more to lose than they do, right? We shouldn't underestimate the fact that when we really get into this fight, I mean, sure, we might have a state and a police force, a military even, that initially might turn on its own people in order to protect these minorities, etc. But what I'm saying is that when conditions get worse and worse, I think that we're going to see something which we have seen, historically in the past, is that if we step up to the plate, the whole game changes at that point. I think we're not there yet. We're still in a position where we have too much to lose, and that's why I think we're seeing what we're seeing right now.
I think we can actually square the circle of this, because I'd agree with you there, Henrik. For despite what I've said, apparently sounding rather different, and it's this: you talk about, or we've been talking about, will people show their faces on the street? Well, yes, when it comes to it, quite large numbers will. They'll then find that the ones in the front ranks get those faces blown off by radical Muslims and gangs aligned with them, armed with vast numbers of high-powered serious pump-action shotguns and such like. And any attempt by our people to organise, to resist, which would involve obviously the use of armed force, will be ruthlessly crushed by our police forces as they desperately try and keep order, not least because they know more about our people, we're easy to infiltrate, than the ethnic minorities and the Muslims. So our armed resistance will be heavily restricted and repressed, where they're basically allowed to do what they want because no one can stop them, with the result that the casualty rate amongst our people is going to be horrendous. And the only way that people in West European countries will survive is if they have contact with people in Central and Eastern Europe who will provide them with the assistance that they need. And again, that's you can't run a guerrilla war, which is what we're talking about here. And I'm not saying we want to, I'm just saying this is going to happen. You can't run a guerrilla war without a secure base where you can train people, when you can recuperate, when you can educate people, and where you can store arms. And the Muslims have those secure bases in the mini failed states of Molenbeek and large parts of Bradford and Birmingham and London and God knows where else. They have those failed states where the police can't go. We don't. And if there's going to be an organised armed white resistance in Western Europe, it's going to have to be based. Its spokesmen are going to have to be based. Its trainers will be based, and its quartermasters will be based in parts of Europe which have decided not to commit suicide, and that's where it's going to be. I've no doubt there will be a Reconquista, no doubt at all, because however many people they slaughter, the historical process of Islam is they slaughter the people who put up some resistance. The ones who submit, they enslave and they use. So the majority of the population of Western Europe will remain ours, or potentially sympathetic minorities such as, say, the Sikhs or the Shia, and in due course there'll be rebellions and such like. And the sheer incompetence of most of these peoples, the fact that one in four of the young Muslims born in this country is a congenital idiot because they all shag their first and second cousins. The fact that they insist on putting their women in black sacks, so once the health service basically collapses, their next generation will all have rickets and all sorts of problems. Once the white man's fighting, we won't have a problem overcoming them, provided you've got enough sons to lose half of them in war, which is what we're really realistically looking at, which is why I say, although the new party we're going to form, yes, it will fight elections, because elections are a way of bringing people in. They're a way of providing a sort of cover against being accused of being crazed extremists who have to be suppressed before they start an armed revolution. Elections have their place, but if anyone thinks that elections are going to change things, then I'm afraid they're going to find themselves sorely mistaken, and the road is much harder, much longer, and much bloodier.
I mean, it's a horrendous picture, and I do understand why you painted, Nick. And I also think that we have very different organizational skills. As you say, we have a different level of creativity. There are many different ways, especially these days, of fighting. And I'm not encouraging anything of this here. I'm just trying to theorize a bit of what could happen when an engineer gets involved, when a technician, even a biomedical researcher or something. I mean, there is tons of different things that directions that this could go, basically.
So I was going to say, Nick's right. I mean, even when he said that the majority of the people in the gyms are young black and Muslim males, and I think of the average Briton has an almost pathological aversion to firearms in this country. Remember, only a few 100,000 Brits even have firearms in a country of over 70 million people. So it's less than 0.1% of the population has a licensed firearm in Great Britain. And then you compare that to the vast numbers of the population of Afro-Caribbean people and Muslim people that live and breathe firearms, and you have a major problem. In the United States, they're a bit different. The average white American has a fascination with weapons, whereas Britons almost are fearful of it. I say that because my wife, who keeps guns due to her background in sport shooting and hunting, has received a lot of flack from her friends who, when they find out that she does that and that she's hunted and she's killed a duck, unbelievably, and eaten it. Can you imagine? She actually ate the duck she killed, but it drives some of her friends ballistic. And some people are even scared to even bring their children. Are you sure the gun is, in the right place? Are you sure it's locked? And, obviously in Great Britain, it's almost impossible to get a firearm without massive background checks and the police inspect your home to make sure that the gun is properly stored and that it's locked away. Even then, the average British person that we've encountered, when they hear that my wife and, we have weapons in the house, they're quite shocked. And I think that's going to be something that people are going to have to overcome, that there's something wrong with having weapons in the house, and there's something wrong with, even like Nick said earlier, the vast majority of young Englishmen are just playing video games on the couch when they should be keeping in shape, going out, running, exercising, developing their minds, developing their self-defense skills, just to defend their families even, not necessarily to engage in some kind of, rebellion against the establishment. But just literally, a man should be strong and smart. And unfortunately, cultural Marxism has made it so men are weak, emasculated, and unfortunately now quite thick. And we need to change that. I think there has to be a complete shift in mentality. Maybe we could even copy I hate to say copy the black mentality, but you see the way the black male postures when he's in public. I don't want to see young white men posturing out in public and picking fights, but certainly having more confidence and, just strengthen their character would be nice. Yeah. We need to kind of, reinvigorate the male figure and, return to a patriarchal society would help. It's going to be difficult, though, with obviously feminism and all the young women as they are. Mm-hmm. But I do think we need to have a transformation, a reshaping of the minds and hearts of young men in this country.
Yep. Well, I'd say absolutely so. Reshaping of hearts and minds of young men and young women, for that matter. But to what extent can that be done in a society which is so rotten and so riddled with liberalism and cultural Marxism as all the countries of Western Europe? We've spoken a little bit on and off about the European Union. I think the latest I've seen, I think they've now come up with, there's more than 40 genders that a child of that a primary school child is allowed to decide and choose what gender they are.
Right. Yeah.
Now, why on earth would anyone in their right mind want to rear a child, let alone children, in a society where that's regarded as normal or acceptable? Because any normal society, the lunatic suggesting that would either be laughed out of court or hung from lampposts if people understood how really evil it is. And when you're in a society where everyone goes along with that and they keep on watching the goggle box, really you've got to think that the revolution has to start not with blood all over the streets and everyone arming themselves. It has to start with a husband and wife deciding they're going to take their kids out of school, they're going to scrap the television, they're going to only let the kids watch videos that they've chosen, and they're going to educate their kids themselves and with other like-minded people in intentional communities. So however many kids out in the mainstream are perhaps even only temporarily lost to our cause and our way of thinking, there's a hardcore and a growing hardcore that will provide the leadership of the future rebellions and revolution, which is of our mind and of our blood.
Yes, and don't underestimate. I mean, the kids. There's a lot of kids now that are rebelling against this SJW, infection that's running rampant through our society. There are people that are actually waking up to these kinds of questions and issues due to the fact that our governments are so vehemently pushing them, upon them, right? And so we have to be there, and this is already happening. It's happening naturally. It's happening through Reddit, through poll, through 4chan, and it's like these kids are sick and fed up with this. They want structure, they want some kind of order, they want to have traditional, family life, traditional, male female relations again. I mean, we have to jump on that, and this is we're going to rebel against the mainstream, and that's happening now. We are in a completely new phase, I think, now. So we shouldn't underestimate. Although it's a dire situation, but I mean, if we think about it. things can change incredibly fast. We don't have to don't have to rebuild society. We don't have to even recreate the whole political structure. It's just the minds and the hearts of the people that needs to be transformed.
Absolutely so. And there is, if for some incredible reason we don't have our basically civil war just around the corner, if the Wahhabis and the Zionists between them don't manage to reduce Europe to a smoking ruin, then there is an alternative possible future in Western Europe. As I say, to think that these people can all be encouraged to leave and they'll all go, it's not realistic. Economically, our society now couldn't do it, remarkably enough, because there simply wouldn't be enough people to keep things functioning, to keep the capitalist society going around. You could do it if you gave up on capitalism, if you gave up on consumerism, if you have a banking revolution, a way of life revolution, and go back basically to living on family farms, then you could do it. I'd love that, but realistically, our people aren't going to want that to happen. They're going to want to keep on, their nice, cozy, comfortable consumer society. So you can't revolutionize it, and you can't get rid of those people. And for that matter, there's 50 million native Brits, and everyone's got one, good immigrant they wouldn't want to see sent home. So that more than covers all of them. So that's not going to happen. But you could have a system where we develop something like Syria was before the usual culprits decided to destroy it, where you've got different communities who've lived side by side for hundreds, even thousands of years, and they work together and they play football together and they support the same national team and they're in the army together. But when it comes to their kids falling in love and marrying and having other kids, it's within their own community, and they're Christians or they're Druze or they're Sunni or they're Shia or whatever. I've been to Syria a number of times, and you can see in Damascus still that system, they actually found a way to make that work perfectly well. But before it can work for our people, in fact, before it can work for any of us, we'd have to ideologically and spiritually develop, all of us, different ethnic communities as well, a complete set of antibodies to the genocidal level of deliberately enforced integration and race mixing. And we'd have to, all of us, develop, and particularly our people, we'd have to develop what most of the ethnic groups have, a proper pride in our own people. And it's normal for your kids to grow up learning songs that their grandparents knew, and it's not uncool to sing those songs. That's what you do. And you could have a society, we're never going to put it back to what it was this side of a bloody revolution, but you could have a society where our people live side by side with them, and our kids still grow up and have kids just like us, which is a damn sight better than we are now. But the only way you're going to possibly get that is if our kids and people like us come to understand that doing the right thing is something you have to do, that wanting to be with your own kind isn't some kind of wicked sin, that you've got a duty to rear your kids up to value our culture and our society and so on. And then you can have something like a peaceful solution, as long as in the end the ethnic minorities, or rather the other ethnic minorities, understand that if they mess around with the Swedes or the English or the French, the Swedes or the English or the French are going to kick their asses.
Well, I think there's going to be an economic collapse due to what we're seeing right now. I mean, they're warning people not to travel in Europe right now, and definitely in Brussels, right? But it's going to have a tremendous impact on the economy. It's going to have a tremendous impact on tourism, and the fact that if more and more of these events happen, people are going to be scared. It's going to shut down everything. And frankly, when the Gibbs me that is gone, when many of these people, they came for the welfare systems and all this, they are going to self-deport. That's and I think that's obviously an ideal situation out of it, right? Because I think we could rebuild. We have done that before. Look at Germany after the Second World War in terms of how they've rebuilt some of their infrastructure and stuff like that. And I don't think it's going to be that bad, to be honest. But I think that a great travesty like an economic collapse is something that we can have work towards our favor. And I think, again, a lot of people would actually self-deport in that situation.
Well, I mean, if the Muslim end game is total domination and replacement of the population and its culture with Muslim people and people then who are raped into submission. So do you really think that they would self-deport if their intention for being here is not just to make money, but to actually convert the entire country of Great Britain into an Islamic state?
Yeah, but they're so small, right? It's a fairly, I mean, that's not the majority of people that are in our countries, right? Am I wrong?
No, you're right. You're right there, because it's not Muslim, it's Wahhabi. All Wahhabis are Muslims. Not all Muslims are Wahhabis. Of course, once you get to the stage of two communities falling out and burning each other's houses down and all the rest of it, then the people in the middle tend to get squeezed and pushed to the extreme. So the large majority will go that way. But even when you take all the Sunni Muslim population, and you add in large numbers of the blacks and the half castes who will tend to go with them as a way of hitting white society and a way of being somebody and all the rest. When you put them in, they're not everybody else. There's lots of, as you say, of others. The Hindus, the Sikhs, the genuinely moderate ones who left their own countries to get away from that kind of lunacy.
Right. Yeah.
And the answer for them is, you're right, to self-deport, because they've got somewhere quite comfortable to go. I remember when we won our first little council seat in 2001, there was an opinion poll done by one of the ethnic newspapers. I can't remember which one, and they came up with a figure something like it was 30% of the ethnic minorities in Britain were now actively considering whether at some point they'd have to go back to their own homelands because of the rise of the BNP. We'd won a council seat in a little bit of Blackburn with, I think it was a total electorate of about 4,000, and 30% were saying we might have to go home. So you're absolutely right. A lot would self-deport, but the ones who are the real problem, the young violent fighting ones, simply won't want to go, and there'll be a horrible mess before we sort that out.
Yep.
And because our elites are on their side more than our side, that's why, if it comes to that, we are going to lose big style before finally our people not just start fighting, but also develop the organisation and the mentality to make sure that fighting works. It'd be far, far more comfortable if, by a combination of good luck, good fortune, and people like us arguing against the English Defence League, Pamela Geller type, we've got to go to war with every last one of them. If we're very, very lucky, we might get the stage, like I said, where we can create out of this multiracial hellhole shambles something whereby our community has an identity and a pride and a cohesion of itself, and at that point can survive even as a minority quite happily as the dominant minority for as long as it's as long as it takes.
It's almost like that this is a kind of a cleansing going on of sorts, right? As society, and unfortunately, and I'm ashamed to say it, but I mean, our culture has just ended up in the toilet, and I mean, it's not directly our fault, obviously, because we have a lot of powerful people, a lot of money working on breaking down our cultural cohesion, breaking down our ethnic consciousness, attacking us who we are, making us feel guilt and shame for who we are, etc. But at the same time, we have allowed that, right? We have not had a defense system. We haven't had the antibodies to fight this. We haven't had the mind to fight this. And it's almost like that the rot in our society is something that is being, it's being exposed right now, and the weak tenets of it is going to be, eaten up by all these parasites, to be honest. And and I wonder, to a certain degree, anything that's starting to die in nature. I mean, this is what happens, right? You have a lot of things just come in and starts to break that thing down, right? I mean, I can't help to see it in that perspective. I think that this will be what I'm saying is ultimately that it is a good thing, right? Because I mean, obviously, as society stands right now, Western society, it's not fit to survive. What do you gentlemen think?
I agree entirely with that. Yeah, and I think it's very easy for people, specifically in Western Europe, to think in terms of, well, if Western Europe sinks, it's the end of everything. It's the end of our cultural civilization and of our race. And that's simply not the case. The United States of America is so vast that a white ethno-state could occupy a fraction of it and still be a thoroughly viable and wonderful place to live and to rebuild. And similarly, just because Rome collapsed, well, from the point of view of Eastern Europe, Rome didn't collapse. Western Rome collapsed, but Byzantium continued for another 1,000 years, and then it shifted to the Third Rome to Moscow. So just because Paris and London and Stockholm and so on may well end up as occupied, just as Spain was occupied for 700 years, doesn't mean it's all over for our people. And the key thing, a reconquista, which, as I said before, there will be, a reconquista is about two things. It's about force of arms, and it's about the numbers to hold the land. And it's just about having kids. Lots and lots and lots of kids. That's the bottom line of the whole damn thing. And if people get that, then inevitably we will win, because the incompetence of the other side will eventually tell once people are forced to fight. And if people don't get it and think, oh, we've just got to fight on now and we'll win in 10 years' time, it doesn't matter if I don't have kids. If our people think like that, then when they're old and childless, they'll realize they've lost, because even if they won the land back, they haven't got any descendants to hold it. Or for that matter, the thing I want to see, one last thing, when we go back to the Parises and the Londons and the Madrids and so on, and we flatten all the 20th and 21st century Marxoid concrete horrors and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I agree.
When we rebuild the cathedrals and the great architecture of our ancestors, we don't have to have enormous numbers to do that. We have to have some numbers of people who are living in a stable, healthy society, and that's going to be overwhelmingly living on their own farms.
Well, to take back the media, obviously, to reprogram people into wanting to having children. I mean, the vast majority of young people have no desire to have children. I have, several friends who have no children, and they're in their 30s. My sister has no children, and unfortunately, the vast majority of the young people that I know in my community have 1 or 0 children, and they have no desire to have children. They've totally been indoctrinated from the cradle until it's too late to have children. And I don't see how we can reprogram them until we control our education system, we control the media, and control the airwaves again. As it stands, we have no influence over what's on the television. We have no influence in what's in the school books, and we have no influence in what people think. And so until we reprogram them, I don't see how anybody will even start having children.
You've got to look at certain groups. And because America's always been open to religious lunatics, most of the religious lunatics with respect to our American listeners, most of the religious lunatics of Europe for 400 years have gone to America. So America's got more than their normal share of genes of people who are, by European standards, slightly wacky. Well, if you look at, I was reading, was it Idaho the other day, where there was an enormous vote against Trump, mainly because it's a Mormon state.
Yeah.
Because the Mormons have lots of kids. It's all about geometric progression over not one generation, but 3-4 generations. And if you have 10 families all determined to have 10 children, which is the human norm, then in the first generation after you do that, it doesn't make a huge difference. The 3rd, 4th generation after you do that, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. And that's it. So forget, don't waste our times trying to reprogram people who think that they can be metrosexual and it doesn't matter if they don't have kids, someone else will look after them in their dotage. Leave them to rot and find out their own way. It's not going to be like that. We have to set about not trying to change everybody, but first of all, change ourselves, change our movement, change our friends, change our families. And when you find someone who can't be changed, move on to somebody who can be. And that's nationalism has to be a sort of a school for white survival. And the first lesson is to reproduce.
It's interesting you said that, because I mean, I've been to the Mormon church a few times because I have a good friend who's Mormon, and my mother is actually Mormon. And it's the one place where there is a semblance of normality. There are children running around, and there are people that actually think in a more old-fashioned manner. And it's interesting you mentioned the Mormons, because they are probably the one group of people in the United Kingdom. There's actually a large Mormon community in the UK, and they are probably the one group of indigenous Britons that are having 2 and 3 and 4 children per household.
So them and traditional Catholics as well.
Well, in Utah, they should have voted for Trump. Why do they vote against Trump?
Of course.
Build a wall.
Romney.
Yeah,
Romney.
I know. Anyway, yeah, well, no, this is a really good point. I mean, I don't know if the desire not to have children is genetic, if there's a predisposition to that genetically in any way. But what seems to be the case anyway is that people who are more conservative minded are the ones that are having kids. So again, I don't know if that's is it just upbringing? Is it more to it? But it's interesting.
I don't think it can be genetic, because if there was a genetic tendency not to have kids, it would self-evidently have bred itself out.
Exactly.
So I think it's the people. There's a genetic tendency for people to conform, especially when conforming is in your own perceived self-interest in practical economic terms. So it's the conformists are breeding themselves out. It's the radicals and the crazies like us who are most likely to carry on breeding. There's one other factor, one of the jokers in the pack. One of the things which persuades people to have kids is actually war. Whenever you have a war, birth rates go up. So at some point, it's quite likely that something will flip very suddenly, as I think Henrik, you said earlier on. Things change in the blink of an eye. Really, something will flick, and people will go from feeling, because they're in a multicultural society, subconsciously that it's not a good place to have kids, to suddenly feeling subconsciously, we're at war, I might die, I've got to have kids, and that could change very, very quickly. We simply don't know. We have to hold out the hope that it will, and in the meantime, as I said before, I'll say it again in case someone hasn't yet got it, that you don't change the demographics of an entire country by waving a magic wand. You change it by the decision of an individual man and woman, and then another couple doing the same thing, and another couple. It starts, listener, with you.
Yeah, what is the purpose, right? Why are you alive, right? What there has to be an underpinning, an undercurrent that anchors them to their culture, to who they are, their heritage, their ethnic consciousness, and that is going to what makes them want to stay alive and continue who they are, right? That's what's important.
And that's why also, not to go back to a point that we made earlier, why it's so dangerous, this homosexual infiltration of nationalism, because we have people here that are entering nationalism and are basically corrupting the minds of the people that will have children moving forward, and telling them that women are the enemy, families aren't worth anything, and not to bother having families and having children. And that's why I think it's really important that one of the primary messages we have in the nationalist movement is that people should be monogamous, have one woman, have a family, create babies, live in the countryside, hunt, fish, farm, go back to traditional values. And that's why we should exclude people that believe that we should kind of promote or even accept alternative lifestyles and kind of a modernist lifestyle. We need to go back to traditional values, I think.
I agree, absolutely. One thing I'd like to say onto that, because I saw a response, I know who it was by, I won't say because he's not here to defend himself or to argue it, but I saw a response from an American nationalist with quite a big reach and so on, who said, there's no point having kids, because if you look at various nationalists, Don Black, David Duke, and so on, their kids haven't grown up as nationalists. Now that's missing the point, one thing, because actually if it's going to come to a shooting war, it doesn't matter whether they were nationalists last year or not. If they're going to survive, they're going to have to be with us or not. So that's the first thing. But the other is having children is the first step. It's then how you rear them. And for anyone to have, and again, a lot of the, I think the Mormons and the traditional Catholics and so on, and the Muslims, they've already got this. First of all, you have the children, and then you ensure that you're sufficiently withdrawn from the disgustingly decadent society around us, that you do enough of the rearing of them and the shaping of their values to make sure that there's a good chance they'll grow up like you. The most dangerous lie the liberals tell of all is that, if you indoctrinate your children, they'll rebel against it. So you mustn't indoctrinate your children, is what they say to traditionalists. Mm-hmm. If they really believe that, why can't they have a TV program or an advert without mixed race couples, without multiracialism? Why can't they have a school lesson without indoctrination about the evils of slavery and all the rest of it? So they don't believe it. It's simply a con. And the simplest thing is that if you have kids and then you let them watch the conventional television, you will lose those kids by the time they're 16. If you have kids and you make sure, as I said before, that you as the family decide what they're going to watch, then it's a different matter. And perhaps in some parts of the world, of Europe until recently, you could have children and send them to a state school and they get a decent education. If you send children now to a state school, you guarantee that they're going to be brought up thinking that they can choose which of 42 genders they belong to. So you've got to cut yourselves off enough of that, and we've got to work on preparing our own curriculum, on teaching our own kids and teaching our community's kids. And if they won't let us do that in a certain country in Europe, then we had to abandon that country, let it go down the tubes to hell until one day our grandchildren go back in with heavy weapons and take those countries back. That's the reality of Europe today.
And this is something that weighs heavily on my mind because I actually have obviously young children, and whether to homeschool, whether not to homeschool. Can we afford a private school because we want to avoid sending our daughter off to the public school, which will indoctrinate her? You mentioned controlling what our families watch. I mean, I hate to say this, and I probably shouldn't, but I even control what my wife watches because I'm petrified that I probably shouldn't say this. And at the end of the day, yeah, exactly. I am petrified that, if I notice that when certain things are on the television, there's a different discourse at the dinner table. So I try to steer the conversation and also steer what we watch on television and what we expose ourselves to, because I know point blank that the stuff that's on the television will just manipulate the minds of the maybe the more vulnerable people in the household. And certainly, I'm going to give you a nice example. When I was in North America about 10 years ago, my mother had a close friend who was married, had 7 children. And my mother used to go to this kind of cooperative that was run by a Jewish lady. And the doctor's wife, who was our neighbor, never went out the house. She stayed home, took care of the kids. The kids had turned 18. There was 5 of them. And this Jewish lady asked my mom to bring this lady to the cooperative to sit down, drink tea, and talk. And my mother didn't. My mother didn't like them. But within 6 months of that lady actually going to this little kind of kibbutz in the countryside, she divorced her husband. So really, who your families interact with is hugely important to maintain the health of your family. So if they interact with people that are destructive, your family will end up destroying itself. So television and who you like Nick said earlier, if someone is causing your family harm just by the way they think, shut them out, get rid of them, and move on.
Yeah, I mean, television is a weapon. It has to be seen as that way. It's something that's being used against us to break us down. Equally, on the opposite side, the media, which includes the news, television programs, movies coming out of Hollywood, is also something that actually can be used against the system itself. I think that if you accurately actually point out how they're seeking to manipulate you, how they're seeking to distort the truth, how they're seeking to turn you into something you're not, etc., you will actually win people over to the fact that they will realize that, oh, damn it, the whole system, this is what they're trying to push on us. It will immediately insulate, not immediately, but if you can accurately point out and show that to them, that basically means that you have a multi-million-dollar effort to try to control people that is now actually turned against itself, right? Just like jiu-jitsu or something, you've turned that force and the energy that they're trying to, push on you against them. And that's why we continuously have to have people who analyzes the news and even television shows and media. And so if you do watch it, actually do take some time and watch it but analyze it at the very least. Talk with your family about it. Talk with your kids if you see something. Educate them. Tell them what's going on, so that we use that as a weapon itself. That's what I would say.
Well, the Mormons are quite good in actually shielding their children from this sort of stuff, and that's why those children end up being quite healthy growing up. I think it's easier to try and shield your family from this sort of thing. I don't know if children are able to comprehend what they're seeing. They just obviously just get indoctrinated, and then you lose them because they will go to school. They will have friends outside the household. So it's probably easier in the short term to move to the countryside, surround yourself with healthy people who think as you do, and then hopefully your children will grow up strong. On a societal level, certainly I agree that it's good if we talk to our children because they're going to be exposed to things. But I'm hopeful that I'll be able to raise a family where we won't be exposed by those things. Maybe it's a pipe dream. Maybe I'm living in dreamland, but I really hope that I can move my family to a place in the next couple of years where we will be away from all these problems and that they won't have to think about these things moving forward. We could be happy and peaceful, safe, and my daughter will grow up very traditional and old-fashioned.
Right. Well, and also additional point here on the demographics that I think we shouldn't also be too freaked out about the projections, right? Because historically they have gone up and down drastically. I mean, you look at after the Black Plague, something like what, a third of Europe was wiped out after the First and Second World War. It's initially not about quantity. I think it is about quality first and foremost, and then that quality can actually go on to create a quantity. So we have to think about it differently. And all these projections, they might not be true. Obviously we have to warn people so that they get incentivized to actually have more children, etc. But it can change rapidly, so we shouldn't get too disheartened and discouraged by it. I think
so the projections are true. It's simply iron laws of mathematics and reality, but it's always a question of on-present trends, and trends can change. But there's no economic reason for them to change at all. There's no media reason or governing ruling body reason for them to change. They're very happy. The people who run the West are very happy with what's happening. So the change can only come from individuals and people within the movement, which is why it's so important that our people get it and constantly talk about it to hammer it home, so it becomes the normal thing. Just as you can recognize a Catholic family or traditional Catholic family because they were large, or a Mormon family, well, equally see a large family. Well, it's probably because they're nationalists, it's over the course of 2 or 3 generations that will change the balance of our society. You don't need that many people who are confident and organised to totally transform a society and to lead everybody else. It's all you need, a significant number of people who are confident and organised. And I always think it's strange how nationalists who we are long-termists, instinctively and ideologically, and then nationalists who talk about a future for our children, and a society will still be here in 1,000 years, or all the rest of it. But then they don't seem to get the fact that there has to be a link in the chain, and the link in the chain is the individual kids of an individual family.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask about something else here. We're coming up at the end here, so we make sure to squeeze anything else in here towards the end too that you guys want to make sure we get out and get to. But the European bureaucrats, I think, they're seeking to use terrorism for their own advantage. They never let a disaster go to waste. We've seen now in Brussels, we've seen it in Paris twice, it's been in London. It's just the beginning, I think, right? But no one ever anywhere, as far as I've heard, is actually talking about the very fact that, it's immigration that is causing these problems. We need to close the borders. We need to get our population under control. No one is talking about this, right? What they are talking about, however, is to create an intelligence network, begin to share information across these so-called borders, which doesn't even exist internally in Europe anymore. And they're also seeking, I think, to create a federal police force, maybe even a military, etc. What's your take on this, Nick? Because they're very happy when this occurs, because it's a great opportunity to them to push the further federalization of Europe, right?
Yeah, I've been there. I've sat with them. I've gone on missions to different places with them, and heard them talking when they've had a drink. And the exact phrase they use, and they use it as a sort of joke, but they mean it, is never let a good crisis go to waste. And the European dream, or nightmare to us, but this ever closer union, at one stage they thought it was going to be achieved through economics and through Schengen and all the rest of it. And they've been blocked in that. But when they're blocked in one direction, they simply cast around for something else that can be done. And you're absolutely right that if the sheeple can't be dragooned into wanting a federal Europe and then in due course, moving towards one world, if they can't be dragooned into it with economic bribery or economic blackmail, then a security threat, we don't want to give up our freedoms, but we've got to. That's the most effective of all. When these people talk about, we have to have, Europe security, and we have to have a federalized police force in order to guard against the terrorists, I'll tell you how bogus that is. When I was last in Damascus, I was with some comrades from the APF in the office of the Minister of Information. And on his desk, he had a pile of books more than 2 feet high. And these were books, each book was from a different country, from Britain, from France, from America, from Belgium, and all the rest. And each book was the intelligence files that they had on the jihadists, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, fighting in Syria who'd come from those countries. And they had, each file had a photograph, had the details where they were from, everything was known about them, where they were fighting. Some were dead, but some of them were still alive. And they got all this intelligence. And they said, we've repeatedly offered this intelligence to all the European nations and to the USA, to their governments and their intelligence departments. And they refuse to accept it from us because to do so, they say, would be to recognize the Assad government. So in all probability, the fighter who even the Turks were saying this man is a foreign jihadist, who was responsible for the murders in Brussels the other day. His details were almost certainly in the book that the Syrian intelligence officers, at great risk to their own lives, because these are people who operate in the jihadist control areas, had identified, and that their information, which would have allowed that man to have been caught, was still sitting on the desk of the Minister of Information in Damascus, because the British government, the Belgian government, and the EU and the Obama regime won't go to them and say, all right, we recognize that you're the legitimate government of that country. Now, please give us the intelligence so that we can stop these people killing people in their own countries. And until they do that, which of course they won't do, then any claim they have that they have to have further powers in order to deal with terrorism is a lie.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, gentlemen, what else should we, talk about here as we approach the end here? Is there anything else that's important that you guys think our audience should be aware or know about? Jack, let's begin with you.
No, I think we covered a wide variety of topics. I would just ask that people watch the videos on the channel and stay tuned for more. We're going to create a nice library of videos. We're thinking of doing one on immigration and the impact it's had on Great Britain, possibly filming in Bradford, and possibly even doing a video about the destruction of the nation's capital. We're thinking about having a camp at some point as well, possibly a training camp where we can bring in young nationalists to learn about what's transpiring and what they can do to change things. And I'm looking forward to working with the APF and Nick. It's been a good month, and I think we've accomplished quite a lot, and we should be accomplishing a lot over the next 6 months as well.
Very good. How about you, Nick?
Well, the full URL of the APF, I looked it up here. As I say, it's going to be improved and you'll understand why. It's alliance, then a hyphen, for hyphen, peace hyphen, and hyphen, freedom.com. That's what happens when people set up things who don't understand how the internet works. So it's alliance for peace and freedom.com with hyphens all the way through it. You can follow me on Twitter at Nick Griffin BU. BU stands for British Unity. You can also find me on Facebook if you look British Unity Party. We're working on, as was discussed a little bit, we're working on a proper launch for a genuine hardline nationalist party in Britain. Jack and I and others are working on that. But if you keep an eye on those places, you'll find out more in due course. I do hope, as I say, reiterate to people wherever you are in Europe or the United States, Australia, wherever, if you're one of us, you're very, very welcome in the Alliance for Peace and Freedom. You will get the chance to rub shoulders with some of the most notorious ne'er-do-wells in modern European politics, such as Golden Dawn and the MPD. So don't miss out on that chance. One last commercial slot from me, if I may. In Hungary on the 23rd of July, I'm involved, and the APF is involved, with a coalition of different nationalists and cultural groups and so on, and proper decent churches as well, to put a big pro-life march out in Hungary, because Hungary's anti-human abortion laws were designed by and put through by a previous socialist government. In Hungary now, you've now got a government which is well to the right of UKIP or Trump, and an opposition party who are the only people I've ever known whose concern, should they be associated with Nick Griffin, was they thought I might be too moderate, and they're the official opposition. And yet they still got this archaic law whereby, although the government is spending lots of taxpayers' money to encourage people to have kids, at the same time, they still effectively got abortion on demand. They want to move to the position that they have, say, in Poland, where there's abortion in the real heart-rending cases, rape, real risk to the mother's life, terrible handicap in the unborn child. And because they've got that, they have 700 abortions a year. That's all in the whole of Poland. And the Hungarians want to shift their governments. They've got a real chance of shifting their government and thereby not only forget the moral, the Christian angle and so on, as a hardcore nationalist, if you want, just think about it, the demographics. They've got the chance of persuading the government to radically transform that law to encourage more Hungarians to go ahead and have more children. So we're holding a pro-life demonstration as the part of a big campaign to encourage the government to change the law, to do the right thing. And there's going to be a big demo in Budapest, which is a fantastic city to visit, really is, with lots of really good nationalists on the 23rd of July, things going on the whole of that weekend, and we hope to see people from all over our world there.
Wonderful, very good. Is there any specific like website or something people can go to try to join in on that if they want to actually be there?
Yeah, it's going to be March for Life Hungary. It's about to be launched on that. But if you're looking for March for Life Hungary on the Alliance for Peace and Freedom, or just generally in the internet, or follow me on Twitter at Nick Griffin BU, then you'll get all the information you need. But the date is set in stone, the 23rd of July. Hope to see you there.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. Very interesting and excellent to have you both with us. Thank you both for your time today, and also, of course, for the work you do to help spread the word about the difficulties, and also, of course, the interesting and challenging times that we are in. I think it's a fantastic time to be alive and to fight for something, and to really get into something which is a cause that few people get to experience. So I'm actually, despite everything and despite how horrible the conditions are, I'm excited about the fact that we are at a stage where we can actually take part in this. So thank you to both of you again for doing what you're doing.
Absolutely so. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. That's our show for today, and that wraps up this week. Thank you for listening. Intense, but probable. Just remember one thing. Europa is ours. We are not going to give up Europe. Ever. It's just not going to happen. Thank you for being a member. Some exciting announcements coming shortly. We'll let you know more about that soon. We have upcoming Frank Jorge, John Ott, Rob Kiewski, Oscar Turner, and a roundtable from Australia and New Zealand, all in the pipeline. Have a great weekend, my friends. Take care of yourself and your family. Talk more soon.